This is Tao Unbound, the English language podcast of Tel Aviv University. Please welcome your host, Ido Aharoni, Tel Aviv University's graduate, member of the Board of Governors, lecturer, writer, and veteran diplomat.
Welcome to another episode of Tao Unbound. I'm Ido Aharoni, your host, and it is my great pleasure to host today in our studio Professor Tali Hatuka.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for being here. I read your bio. It's wow, amazing. And the stuff that you're dealing with is so relevant. Let me tell you who Tali Hatuka is. She's an Israeli architect and urban designer. She's teaching at the Faculty of Social Sciences in what used to be the Department of Geography, not anymore, at Tel Aviv University. And she directs the Urban Design Laboratory, which we will talk about today. We'll try to understand what is it that the laboratory does and why it's so important. She is the winner of the most prestigious prize called the Rechter Prize in 2012 for young architects. She writes on the connection between spatial design and architecture, social issues and violence, and also contemporary city design and development. And most recently, she published a book about industrial city design, and we will talk about all of that.
Great.
So this is quite a bio that you have. But before anything, tell us about yourself. Where were you born? Where were you raised? When did you become interested in architecture?
The whole story.
The whole story.
So I was born in Ramat Gan, and I was raised in one of the first high-rises in the city. Oh. And it's very interesting.
This near Oasis?
Not near Oasis. It's near Yarden, if you know it. Anyhow, it was very interesting because I grew in a building that was a sort of microcosmos of the Israeli society. So we have Orthodox and we have different ethnicities in the building, different socioeconomic backgrounds of families, and it was a very interesting experience. So from my perspective, I grew in this kind of multicultural sphere, and we were very happy then. No, not so many conflicts, so the world looked to me ideal. But, you grow up and we will get to it, to questions of conflicts and violence. So I grew in Ramat Gan in a sort of a very calm environment. I went to high school in Tel Aviv, which is a very prestigious art school. And I would study plastic arts. And I was a very talented or dedicated, I would say, painter and sculptor. And so this was like the point where I decided that I will go to study architecture.
So you came to it
from arts.
From the design angle.
From the design angle. And I went to the Technion. And actually, this was the first question you are asked when you come to the Technion. Why did you decide to study architecture? And so I said, well, I thought that it will be somehow connected to the arts. And I realized after a while that it's a lot of work and not just artistic kind of work. And but it was really exciting studies back then. I studied in the 90s, early 90s. So we worked a lot on our projects day and night. I don't know if you know, but architecture studies are really, really hectic and demanding. And but I already knew towards the end of my studies that I will not just be happy with what I got at the Technion, and I want to explore more. And happily, I worked for a few years in practice. I worked and designed mainly public buildings. But after 2 years, I received a very prestigious grant from the British Council. And I went to study in Britain, but not in London, as usually people think. I decided to go to study in Edinburgh. And I decided to study urban design, which is, again, a field that is a little bit expanding the scope of architecture, looking at cities, looking at the design of the city. And Edinburgh, have you been?
I've never been to Edinburgh.
Okay,
No.
Edinburgh is a very beautiful city. And if you have to decide about or think about a city that is ideal in terms of design, you should go to Edinburgh. Everything there is really well planned. You think about landmarks and nodes and, everything is really well thought. And so I've been there for 2 years. I did my thesis there. I was very happy. Again, this was very much oriented towards design, as I was sure I would come back to Israel and I will open my own practice and I will change the world. I will change the Israeli landscape. I looked at the Israeli cities and I said, wow, this needs some work. And I have to say that after coming back, I worked again in an office. I realized that I cannot do a lot. I realized that there is a huge gap between the Western theories and the European ideas, which are wonderful, but it will be very hard to implement them in the Israeli context.
Yeah, but it's interesting that you went to study in Great Britain, especially in Scotland, because the British influence, especially on Tel Aviv, is huge. You know that the original urban plan was designed by Geddes, who was Scotsman himself, right?
So that's why I thought that I will be able to integrate the ideas and theories and the skills that I got from Edinburgh and Britain in general to the Israeli context. But it's much more complex. I mean, Israel is highly influenced from the West, but it's a hybrid place. We are located in the Middle East, and we cannot really think about ourselves as like a Western country in its, pure sense. So after 1 year in practice, I realized that I cannot really accomplish my vision, which was to influence the Israeli landscape, very megalomaniac, you would say. I really wanted to influence the reality around me. So I went back to the Technion. And I was searching for someone that will understand my dilemma and my questions. And I found my supervisor, Professor Rachel Kalush, and she really understood my frustration because she studied at MIT and she faced similar problem when she came back to Israel. So we kind of decided to work together. We understood very well the gap between all these ideas to the local context, and we understood that we need to somehow find a way to bridge this gap. So I did my PhD at the Technion. We can talk about it later a little bit, what came out of these ideas and frustration. And then even before I submitted my PhD, I received 2 prestigious, fellowship, the Fulbright and Marie Curie, which gave me €250,000 to develop my own project in the US. So I went again to MIT, 3 years, and there I worked closely with some of the colleagues that I still work today. So I had a very kind of long journey, but it looks linear. It was not linear. It was always kind of... the drive was always the frustration and the need and desire to do more and to think more and how, again, to influence the Israeli context. And then after MIT, my husband didn't want to stay at the US. I was really encouraged to stay at MIT as a faculty, but it was no go. And I chose love, and I chose Israel. And I chose Tel Aviv University, so here I am, talking to you.
As they say, their loss is our gain, right? Yes. We're happy that you're here.
Yes.
Now, there's, not every person that is watching us or listening to us right now is familiar with the terminology, and so teach us the basics. So, for example, there's clear relationship between urban planning. Why do we need to plan, right? Mm-hmm. Urban centers, and of course the size of the population, right? 1945, the Second World War ended. The 2.5 billion people in the world. Today, the 7.5 billion. By 2060, they project to have 10 billion people. Okay, mm-hmm. What does it say about the need to plan, and why is it so important?
Actually, I think that Israel is always facing this struggle with urban planning. coming back, I will come back to your question, but coming back to the question of Britain and the US, they have a long, or at least longer history than us in terms of planning. So the bureaucracy, the regulation, the way they understand city, the evolutionist city of the cities in Britain or also in the US is quite slow comparing to us. So demographic growth in Israel is really fast. Also in the 40s and 50s with all the immigration waves that we had to absorb here. So Israel is always kind of working in a under stressful conditions, and it really needs to work fast, extremely fast.
And planning is a luxury.
And planning is not a luxury. We cannot do without planning, because if we will give up on planning, we will live in chaos. But it's always a sort of compromise between the time and the pressure from the ground, the demands of the people, and the need to provide them, shelter and parks and working spaces, and the process of planning. Planning is a profession which is quite slow, also to a certain extent a bit anachronistic, and it doesn't really meet the pace of contemporary time. Technology, and again, demographic growth in our case, and also the really difficult challenge of Israel with almost no vacant lands and the need to protect like open spaces. So there are lots of dilemmas here. And even if you ask me, how do I see the future of Israel, I would say I can't really tell you. I can tell you that we want to fight for some principles that will help us to enhance livability in Israel, but it's very hard to tell. Like right now we work with statistics of demographics that assumes that we will keep growing, but it might be that it's not going to be the case. Like, for example, when we look at the statistics 10 years back on the Arab population, we had assumed that, business as usual, they will also increase the numbers, but at the end it didn't happen because people are changing, culture is changing, people want to live modern life. So even today, when you look at the Orthodox Jewish sector or the Arab sector or even the secular sector, it's very hard to predict what will happen. We work with the numbers as they are today and anticipate, but it's very hard to predict exactly what will happen.
Now, there must be a balance maintained between two different, when I was in government, the people used to say in frustration that in Israel, and I suspect in many governments, the urgent always overrides the important. The urgent comes first before the important, right? So that's one kind of tension that you have to balance. And the other is between the concrete and the abstract. So there are, obviously, when you plan a city or any kind of living environment, then you have to deploy engineering methodologies and so on. But what is the balance between that and understanding things that cannot be quantified?
Well, this is one of the biggest questions that I also face with. And I know you wanted to come back to what the lab is doing later on, but...
Oh, we'll get to the lab.
Okay, but I would say that vision is compulsory. And vision is always start from abstract ideas. Even if you think about Israel, and Herzl and all the other visionaries, they had an idea. And there was the place. And sometimes the idea and the place were not really matching, But if you have a good idea and you are able to kind of develop it in a structural way, you can always influence reality. So I would say, and actually I teach a lot a course, for many years I taught a lot the course that was entitled Utopian as a Methodology in Urban Planning. Without a vision, you will always get more of the same. And more of the same won't help you to solve like key problems. So of course, the key problems or the urgent problems are the now. But without this kind of longer term ideas or vision, you have to understand where we are going. If you don't have anything in your mind, you will keep solve like very tiny things that won't solve anything. So even coming back to we are talking, we still have a war. So if you ask me, I'm now involved in the reconstruction at the north, Kiryat Shmona and the northern area.
And what kind of vision do you think we need over there?
So the government has started to develop the idea of enhancing like strong anchors, like the university, transforming Tel Aviv from a college to a university. I'm involved in that too. And also, we have to think about, now we work on new tools or new ideas of how to develop these kind of economic anchors at the north to enhance like the demographic growth there. So this is, the tools are not enough. You first have to have an idea what this place is going to be. How do you want to envision it, not just today, but in 20 years to come? So this is where planners are coming into play. And this is what I, as someone that come from the academia, are trying to help the people that work on the ground.
Now, one of the things that you studied is the connection between spatial design and architecture and social issues and violence, which leads me to my next question. Is it really a function of a place or design, or there's a way to reduce social maladies like crime and violence by better design?
This is an interesting question. I would say we cannot look at space in really rigid, deterministic, way. I think that violence will happen everywhere and all the time. The only question is how we design spaces that somehow help to reduce violence or somehow change normative behavior in a way that kind of reduce.
Can you share some examples so that people can relate to that?
So I will talk about my PhD because my PhD worked on that. And actually, it looked at this from the other way around. What we did is, in my PhD, I looked at the suicide bombings in the 90s. And it was a very dramatic time, the Oslo Accords and everything. It was really kind of sad, frightening period. And also the assassination of Prime Minister Rabin. And I was thinking how violence not just happens or bursts, but how it influenced the reconstruction of place. So for me, and I can tell you, there is always relationship between violence, wars, terror attacks, and the reconstruction of place. Planning is the profession that comes after. It can come before, and somehow, in a very tranquil areas and zones can reduce violence in daily life. But it has a major role in post-traumatic events like war, terror attacks, and so forth. And this is what the PhD revealed, that actually the economic development and the visioning of places post-traumatic event is is highly successful, and we can see it also all over the world. It's not something that is unique to Israel, and also throughout history, wars actually contribute to development of space. But again, you need vision. And I coming back to the northern area, we know that Kiryat Shmona, I've been working on Kiryat Shmona and helping them with the Ministry of Economy before the war, and there were like great signs that they are on track. But now I think that this is also an opportunity for us. Now the situation is not that great, right? There are almost no people in the city, but still we wanted to enhance the city as a strong anchor for the region as a whole. So the question is, how can we use this opportunity, not just to bring the people back, but to develop new projects, new ideas about the region in a way that we couldn't do before the war. So the planners are very much about, thinking ahead, future, visioning. It doesn't mean that it's always successful. There are many, many, many failures everywhere, but it's about structural thinking, future thinking, that in some cases is very successful, in others not.
And the role of the government in this, are you an advocate of more governmental involvement, or you believe in the free market, the power of the free market to help the cities?
This is a great question. I didn't think that we will get there, but I believe very much in the triple helix. The triple helix, it's a model that advocates for collaboration among the private market stakeholders, the academia, and the government. So right now, if I look at what I do at the north, at the periphery of Israel, it's always an agglomeration of these different stakeholders. I think that the academia has a very important role because we can bring new knowledge to the practice, but you need the people on the ground. You definitely need the private stakeholders. They are, at the end of the day, the developers or the people that work in industry or the employers or whatever. And you need the government. Without the support of the government and funding and also the power of regulation, you are very, very limited in the scope of what you can do.
Before I'd like to ask you about your lab, of course, but before that, one last question. Can you give us an example of one place in the world that, thanks to planning, was able to recover very successfully after a big trauma, let's say a war, like maybe Germany, Japan?
If you look after there is massive literature, about the role of architecture and planning post-World War II. So if you look at Europe today, we forget about it because we go to these wonderful cities, we go to the centers of these towns, but every city that you visit in Germany, like Kassel or even London, they are all highly influenced from the attacks during World War II. And this is again, people forget very, very quickly. But I think in many, many cities in Germany, also you can visit different sites in the UK and of course in France and everywhere that were highly influenced from Second World War II. They all have been reconstructed. In Germany, it's really evident because like Dresden or Kassel have been really, really bombed significantly.
So how does the trauma affect the actual planning? So, for example, I'm looking at Lower Manhattan after 9/11, and very quickly, 15 years after 9/11, the place was fully recovered, but there was a different angle to it. They built it differently. They put a big emphasis on the memory.
So I think this is a good question. This was part of my PhD. I'm a little bit distant from that now, but there is always the question, do we build something new that is not associated with the trauma, or do we build something that commemorates the event and the trauma? And of course, in my PhD, I also was very much influenced from psychoanalysis, and my position, which is not always the agreed position, is to move forward. because, you can put something symbolically to commemorate the event and the trauma and the victims, but at the end of the day, we have to face, the new futures.
Right. And of course, in Israel, we have, for obvious reasons, a whole culture that is built on the need to create architecture of memory.
Yes, but if we will do only architecture of memory, we will live in a huge graveyard, right?
Well, I think in many ways that's the Israeli culture, right? There's a whole culture of bereavement, and that's part of it.
Yeah, but at the same time, I would argue that the Israeli culture is really resilient and parallel to this kind of culture of memory, you have also constantly the culture of innovation, of thinking ahead, of new developments, of not giving up. And I think this is the urban planners needs to find a good balance among the two.
So tell us about the Urban Design Laboratory, which you're heading. What do you do there, and how can our audience become part of it?
Right. So when I came back from MIT, at MIT, by the way, I did a huge exhibition at the MIT museum that culminated these whole ideas between violence, protest, and public squares. It was part of the 75th celebration of the department that I was hosted by the Department of Urban Planning and Studies. It's one of the big and the most important department in the world for urban planning. But after finishing this project, which received many good reviews, I decided that if I come back to Israel, I want to influence again reality. So my lab is a place where we try to bridge between theory and practice. So what we do a lot of research, basic research, what we call in the academia. So we explore new venues and new things and new horizon for future cities. But at the same time, I take this knowledge with me and I'm trying to influence the reality in Israel. So I work very closely with ministries, with municipalities. They often call me and they say, okay, we would like to test some of your ideas as a pilot in our city, or the Ministry of Economy suggests, okay, why don't you come and try to do something with these ideas in reality? And that's what I do. So the laboratory is doing both very theoretical research, but also trying to take it to practice. It's not easy.
So let's take, just so that our listeners and viewers will have a practical sense. Let's take the Israeli desert, okay, whether the Negev or the Arava.
So it's interesting that you say that. So I will take one of the themes that we have explored, that we tested it in the south. So one of the big issues that I've been working on over the last 10 years is the industrial development. Industry is changing. Labor is changing with AI and everything, and we know that. And we also know that we have to think about industrial development in a new way and support it. Support in terms of design and technology and environmental regulation in a different way. So I did a project with a colleague from MIT, Eran Ben Yosef, also a former Israeli, and together we wrote a book called New Industrial Urbanism. Because what we know is that cities are going to change. Clean industry is going to be inserted back in cities. The whole idea of labor work is going to change. And it's also going to influence the development of remote industrial sites.
So you mean industry will be inserted into the city, so no more separate industrial zones?
No. What I'm saying, we will have both. But we will have to think about how to accommodate industry back in the city. And we also will have to think about how do we want these kind of industrial zones outside the city will be developed. We know that people now don't you know, you don't want just to come to the factory, work, and go home. So industrial areas all over the world are really nicely designed, well supported in terms of public amenities, parks. It includes everything. It's like residential environment, you know, just with working spaces. So the question is how here in Israel we are doing this jump, you know. And we wrote the book. We wrote also some policy documents, and we published this in Hebrew. And one day, this is a nice story if we have the time.
Sure.
I'm getting a call to my office, and we published all these, you know, like we do it now in the internet. Someone listened, someone read it, and I got a phone call from a senior person in the Ministry of Economy. And he calls me and said, Tali? I said, yes, this is me. Said, well, we read your policy paper. There is some sense to it. I was laughing, you know. It makes sense to us, and we want you to do a pilot in the South. And I said, well, I'm a researcher. I don't have now time to design for you a new industrial site, right? And he said, well, you know, you have to work and influence what's happening in the South, and, you know, a little bit of ideology, Zionism, periphery, and I was convinced. And I said, okay, I will be happy to provide some guidance. No. We want you to think about how you take the ideas from research into practice. I said, but I wrote everything. And he said, well, it's not enough. There is a gap, and it cannot be bridged. We need you to do a pilot from the research to the practice, and then later people will do whatever and will use it for other sites. So I did it.
So they wanted you to create a system, basically.
They want me to do a pilot, create a model, a strategic planning for industrial sites. And for a particular area, it's 3,000 dunam back then. Now it's actually increased. It's 5,000 dunam. It's actually near Netivot. It's a huge site. And the idea was to design or to develop a system, strategic plan that will include new way of thinking about industrial sites in Israel. And based on that, they actually further enhanced these ideas in other places. And actually, it's a good example how through this one project that was later, you know, published in the web and was given to other planners in the private sector to use and to think about how it influenced both the concepts in the Ministry of Economy, but also the practice. But since then, I'm getting often phone calls from different municipalities and ministries being asked to help. I have to say I don't have the time to help everyone, so I pick the projects from the lab for the lab based on like the influence or the impact they would have on the reality of cities in Israel. I'm trying to work mainly with the periphery, and I always look for leadership, because when you are trying to push for new ideas, you must have a strong leadership. Without a leadership, there is no go. You can have all the money in the world, you know, but when you want to push for new ideas, you need someone to fight for them. So I always look for this like dream team. I have this idea of dream team. Without a dream team, I'm not even starting. Yeah,
the leadership also has to be committed to it, of course.
And
now, let me ask you one last question because we're running out of time. So you're doing incredible work, and obviously you are connecting academia to real life, right? You're working in the north, you're working in the south with real people, real decision makers, and you're helping them, and that's terrific. That's the whole idea. What are your plans for the future for the lab? And again, I ask you about our audience because I know there's a lot of people out there who passionately and deeply care about Israel, and maybe they want to be involved in your work. So tell us what's your plan for the future and how our friends can be part of what you do.
So first, I think that urban planning and in general cities is one of the biggest challenge of the Israeli society and Israel in general. I mean, we started the conversation about the demographic growth, and I think that this is something that we need to invest more in. Unfortunately, I would say the academia sphere that engage in planning in Israel is not that big. So that's why my hope is that our lab will expand and we will host more and many more students for master and PhD degrees. But what I would like is actually to open the lab more to the public. Now I'm trying to develop initiative with Tel Aviv Municipality to have that part of the lab will go to the city, actually outside the Tel Aviv University, and we'll have a space with big exhibition that will host students from high school. I want really that people will understand the power, the role, and the significance of urban planning. This is in the education level, the pedagogic level. But on the other side, I would like very much to develop new projects that will somehow enhance the resiliency and the livability of cities in Israel. So there are many topics that we haven't been discussed here, but I have lots of a big project on digitization and how it influenced the development of cities. And of course, there is a huge gap between the peripheral cities and the central cities. So there is a lot of things to be done here.
And the threshold of being defined as a city in Israel is what, 40,000 now? What's the population how many people you need to have in order to be recognized as a city by the state of Israel?
Something like that.
40,000.
We have
right?
too many cities. We have too many municipalities. This is, again, one of the major problems when we compare it to US, or you can have like millions of people that have one jurisdictional municipality or council. And here you can have, even at the north, Eastern Galilee, you have like 100,000 people with so many different municipalities. Right. So there are lots of conflicts and things to be done there. So
the big structural problems.
Yes, but the future of this land is very much also relates to urban planning. How do we keep, where do we build, why do we build it, how do we integrate digitization, what kind of design guidelines we want to enhance, how we develop the city as an ecosystem. We don't want people to move from one place to another. We want them to be part of this community. Otherwise, if people will, commute from one place to another, we will stand in one huge traffic jam. So again, coming back maybe to the way we started this conversation, visioning is compulsory. We have to think outside of the box. We cannot really follow the guidelines of the US and not the guidelines of Europe that suffer from negative demographic growth, and the US with all their vast spaces and land. So we have to think outside of the box, and we need visioning. And through this, we need to decide about how do we develop new tools to manage this wonderful place.
Well, that was a lot of food for thought. Professor Tali Hatuka, thank you so much for taking the time to come to our studio and engage in a conversation about something very abstract. And thank you for carrying the message of raising the flag of planning and vision in a society that is almost obsessed with crisis. And crisis management. So hopefully we'll get to host you here again in the near future.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Our pleasure. And to our viewers and listeners back home from Tel Aviv, goodbye until our next episode.